ones I'm going to work on. I do have a couple of them done. I want you to see how they're turning out. So to do these, I mentioned that I might use different colored backgrounds and different colored points because it's a freestyle. Make it a little different. Use some different colors. So these are the two arches that I'm going to piece next, that are going to be here. And I've got scraps. So I've got some pieces of purple that I've cut into some sections, but then some of them I have in those longer strips, the width of the paper, like we did in the traditional New York Beauty. So I've got some of those. I'm going to mix those up as we go along. Same thing with the background fabrics. My tools, again, my 28mm rotary cutter, a snip pair to just cut between the pieces, my add a quarter ruler, and my Clover mini iron in its cup to keep everything safe. So I'm going to move this over to the other side of the sewing machine. Get everything moved over here too so that it's near the sewing machine. And let's move these out of the way so I don't accidentally cut them, because I say that with experience, like as if that's ever happened before. All right, so I got all my things ready. I'm going to start with, just like in regular New York Beauty, I'm going to start with the background piece. When you're piecing the Freestyle New York Beauties, you're going to piece on the shiny side. So this is the shiny side of the freezer paper. This is what I'm going to see in the end. So I'm going to place my background piece on top of the freezer paper, covering that seam. And then because I have freezer paper, I can actually heat it up enough to make it hold on to the paper. Then I'm going to pick one of my purples. I'm going to lay that down on that edge and start sewing. Now I'm going to start sewing off the edge. So, oh, I forgot to mention, remember we have to add that 1/4 of an inch to these pieces? I need my background piece and my purple to come out here about 1/4 of an inch. So I'm just there on this. I'm going to start sewing off the paper, sew all the way on. I'll show you what I've done. All right, now for the pressing of these, again, because we have that freezer paper, I really like using my Clover mini iron because that's going to heat up the wax and hold it down. Now I'm going to use my add a quarter ruler. I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to fold on my next sew line and cut with the add a quarter. Now if I was using the strips of fabric, those bigger strips, I would do the straight cut first and then the angle cut. But when I'm using just scrap pieces, I don't do that. I will set that to the side. That's a nice size piece. Might be able to use it again. Okay. Now I can flip this over and place my next piece. Now my next piece is for a gray background. This one looks good. I'm going to lay the straight edge onto the straight edge. And remember, I need to be sure that I come over 1/4 of an inch. But in this piece, you don't have to come all the way to the end here because this line stops right there. So I'm going to have my gray piece just go at least a little bit past there. There's the end of it. That's where my piece goes. So I have plenty of space. The other thing is when I am piecing this, I'm only going to piece, I'm going to start here on the inside. It's not like the traditional New York Beauties where the points come all the way to the bottom. You need to start on the inside line and then sew all the way off. So that's what I'm going to do now. Position to the inside, put my presser foot down so I'm starting right there on the inside piece. And sew all the way off. Now when I bring it to my cutting, I can do the pressing again. I do love the way that you don't have to do any pins or anything because the freezer paper will hold on to the fabric for you. Flip it over. Here's my next cut. I want to snip those threads. My next one is on this next sew line, which that's where I started. So now the next sew line is going to go right past it. Oops. And cut. Now I get to place a different color purple. This time I'm going to use a strip. I'm going to lay that down. It has to cover 1/4 of an inch, at least 1/4 of an inch. Honestly, make it a 1/2 inch, just then you know that you're safe. So it's coming out here 1/4 to a 1/2 inch and coming out here 1/4 to a 1/2 inch. This time I can start sewing all the way off it and sew all the way off the other end. back and press. Now this, more like the traditional New York Beauty, I used a strip, so I'm going to do the fold, the straight cut, then the angle cut, and I'm ready to place a gray. So I'll find a gray. Using some mixing up pieces. Checking out, all right, this one starts here, so it doesn't go all the way to the end, but it needs to stick out past the paper, at least 1/4 to 1/2 inch here, and then come down, the point goes to here, so that gives me my 1/2 inch. I'm going to start sewing on that line. I'm not going to start sewing all the way off the edge. I'm going to start sewing right here and go all the way off the edge. Now I'm going to continue piecing this arch, and when we come back I'm going to show you how to trim it up. So we have this completely pieced. I love the look. I love the shading of the gray and the different purples. When we look at it from the back side, you see that I intentionally left a lot of fabric outside the design because I need to trim it 1/4 inch bigger on the curves, not on the straight side, but on the curved portion. So I first need to press it. So I'm going to use my Mary Ellen's Best Press. Yep, I use a lot of it. And then with my nice iron, and my iron is set to no steam because I want it to dry faster. The back side. And I want to make sure it is completely dry, so you need to press with patience until it is completely dry. Remember, this is cotton fabric. You don't need to worry about that it's going to be scorched or singed. This is good fabric. This is not going to be a problem. All right, that is completely dry. I'm going to bring my cutting board back in. Now I'm going to trim the outside section and the inside section 1/4 inch bigger, and I'm going to use my add 1/4 ruler to do that by sort of resting the 1/4 inch, because remember the add 1/4 has that lip on the bottom that's 1/4 inch. I'm going to rest that lip on the edge of the paper and go around just little bits at a time. You can't do one big huge fat swing with this. You got to take your time, go around. Now, if you wanted, you could use your add 1/4 and draw that line and then cut it out with scissors. There'd be nothing wrong with doing that. On the edges, I'm going to cut straight. And the inside, I always find to be a little bit more difficult. Something about doing that inside curve. Now we're going to take the paper off in the reverse order that we put it on. So we're going to start with this one. And very intentionally take the paper off, fold it back, peel it out. Now remember, this is freezer paper. So some of these, like right here, that seam is kind of sticking to it. So you've got to go in and release the seam from the freezer paper. But take your time and take all of the paper out. is ready. When we come back, we're going to work on the curved pieces.